What happens when a quiet firefighter rescues a single mom and her son from a small kitchen fire and then keeps showing up long after the flames are out? Claire is terrified to let anyone in again, but Jake isn't ready to walk away. This is a story about fear healing and the unexpected ways people can become family. Stay with me because this is one heartwarming journey you won't want to miss. The smell of burning oil hit Claire before the smoke did. She had only looked away for a minute, just 1 minute to help Eli find his missing sock. By the time she rushed back into the kitchen, the pan on the stove was already blazing. Orange flames licked up toward the microwave above smoke curling thick and fast toward the ceiling. She froze for 1 second, just 1 second too long. Mommy Eli's voice behind her was small and scared. Claire snapped into motion. "Back up, baby, back up!" She grabbed a dish towel, tried to flap it at the flames, but that only made it worse. Panic tightened around her throat. Her hands shook. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The fire alarm started blaring. She turned, scooped Eli into her arms, and bolted for the front door, kicking it open with her foot as smoke poured out behind her. The night air hit her lungs like ice water. Her heart thundered as she sat Eli down and dropped to her knees in the grass outside their apartment building. She wrapped her arms around him, rocking slightly, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay," even though nothing felt okay. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. When the fire truck pulled up, lights flashing red against the building's brick exterior, Claire's breath caught in her throat again, not from fear this time, but from sheer adrenaline collapse. Firefighters jumped down, barked orders to each other, and rushed toward the unit. One of them, tall, calm, with soot already dusted on his jacket, walked straight toward Claire and knelt in front of her and Eli. "You the ones from Unit 3B?" he asked, voice steady. Claire nodded mutely. "You did the right thing by getting out." His eyes flicked to Eli. "Hey, buddy, that was a scary one, huh?" Eli clutched Claire tighter but nodded. The firefighter offered a small, soft smile. "I'm Jake." "What's your name, little man Eli?" he whispered. "Well, Eli," Jake said, reaching into a pocket and pulling out a little plastic badge sticker, "you're officially a junior firefighter now." Eli blinked. His trembling fingers reached out to take the sticker, and for the first time since they'd run out of the apartment, he cracked a tiny smile. Jake looked back at Claire. "Anyone else inside?" She shook her head. "Just us." He nodded. "Good. The guys will handle the fire. Looks like it started in the kitchen." She nodded again, shame pressing hot against her chest. "Oil on the stove. God, I should have known better." Jake's expression didn't shift. "You got your son out. That's all that matters." She looked down, tears stinging her eyes. "I feel like an idiot." He said nothing for a moment, then gently offered a blanket. "You're not. You're scared. That's allowed." They waited outside for what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes. A neighbor brought out water bottles. Eli curled up next to Claire on the curb, his head on her lap, finally dozing off. Jake returned once the smoke cleared, crouching beside them again. "Kitchen's a mess, but it's under control. Smoke damage in the hallway, but the bedroom's okay. You'll probably want to stay somewhere else tonight if you can." Claire nodded. "I'll call my sister. She's about an hour away." "Good," he said. She hesitated, then said softly, "Thank you." Jake gave her a tired, crooked smile. "Just doing my job. But I'll swing by tomorrow, make sure the inspector gets here, and help with whatever's next." Claire blinked. "You don't have to do that." "Maybe not," he said, "but it looks like you've got your hands full." His eyes moved to Eli's sleeping form, the little badge sticker still clutched in one hand. Claire looked away, flustered. "Thanks." Jake stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a lot." And just like that, he was gone, walking back to the truck, blending into the night, the last to leave. Later at her sister's house, after Eli had been tucked into a guest bed, and Claire finally sat alone with a cup of tea she couldn't bring herself to drink, the events of the night washed over her in waves, the smoke, the panic, Eli's wide eyes, her own shaking hands. And then Jake, steady, quiet, present. She didn't know why it mattered that he said he'd come back tomorrow, but somehow it did. She stared out the window into the dark, still shaken, still ashamed. But she'd remember the way he said, "You are not an idiot. You're scared. That's allowed." For the first time in a long time, someone had said the exact thing she didn't know she needed to hear. Claire didn't sleep well even in her sister's guest room, far from the charred kitchen and the stench of smoke that still clung to her hoodie. Her brain replayed the fire again and again in flickering, looping terror. By 5:00 a.m., she was wide awake sitting in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee and circles under her eyes. Eli, on the other hand, was bouncing. "Can we go home today?" he asked while eating cereal with his hands. "Not yet, sweetheart," Claire said softly. "The apartment has to be checked out first." "Is the kitchen gone?" he asked. "Will we get a new one?" "Maybe," she said, trying to smile. "We'll see." He paused, fingers sticky with milk. "Will Mr. Jake be there?" Claire blinked. "Jake, the fire guy," Eli said. "He said he'd come back." She hadn't told Eli that, hadn't even realized he'd heard. Maybe she said, after a pause, "We'll find out." By noon, Claire stood on the small patch of concrete outside her apartment building again. The front door had a red inspection tag taped to it. When she let herself in with the spare key, the stale smoke still hung heavy in the air. The walls were stained, the microwave blackened on one side. The kitchen was exactly as she remembered it, ash-melted plastic and burnt shame. She stood there frozen in the silence. No alarms, no flames, but her throat still closed up. "Hey." She jumped at the voice behind her. Jake was in the doorway, a clipboard in one hand, baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He looked like someone who belonged in emergencies, even when there wasn't one. "I knocked," he added. "Didn't mean to startle you." "No, it's fine." She stepped aside. "You came," he glanced around. "Yeah, I just wanted to check on the place." "You and your son, okay?" "We're managing," she said. "Staying with my sister for now." He nodded, looking at the kitchen. "The damage stayed mostly contained. You'll need to replace the stove, maybe get a new microwave. Smoke got into the cabinets, but you're lucky it didn't spread further." Claire followed his gaze. "Lucky," she muttered. "Right." Jake turned toward her. "You got out. That's lucky." She didn't answer. He stayed longer than she expected, checked the smoke alarms, opened the windows, even helped her bag up some food from the fridge that had spoiled. She tried not to let him see how overwhelmed she felt, how the smell of charred plastic made her nauseous, how her fingers trembled when she touched the scorched wall behind the stove. "You have someone helping you with repairs?" Jake asked eventually. "No," she said. "My landlord's useless. I'll probably have to figure it out myself." He gave a small grunt. "Figures," Claire crossed her arms. "Don't suppose you moonlight as a contractor," he grinned, brief and wry. "Only if you count patching holes after my brother breaks stuff." She tilted her head. "You have a brother?" had Jake said simply, then he looked away. "It's just me now." The air shifted slightly. Claire didn't ask more. She understood the tone. Some silences weren't meant to be filled. Eli came barreling into the apartment 30 minutes later, her sister trailing behind him. "Mom?" he called out. "Mom, is it still broken?" Claire met him at the doorway. "We're just checking on things, baby." Eli's eyes lit up when he saw Jake. "You came back?" Jake crouched slightly. "Told you I would, didn't I?" Eli grinned, holding out something in his hand, a toy fire truck scuffed and missing one wheel. "This is you," he said. Jake smiled. "Looks like a good truck." Claire watched the exchange from a distance, her son beaming and unafraid, and this man who had no obligation to be here, and yet was. It made her stomach twist in a way she didn't know how to name. When her sister left with Eli again, Jake lingered. "You don't have to keep checking in," Claire said finally. "I know you probably have 100 other fires to put out." "I do," he said without flinching. "But I also know what it's like to come back after the damage is done. That's the part nobody trains you for." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. "I'll bring by a portable fan," he added casually. "Help with the smoke smell." Claire hesitated. "Why are you being so nice to us?" Jake leaned against the door frame, quiet for a long moment. "Because once a long time ago, someone was kind to me when I didn't know how to ask for it," he said. "And I've never forgotten." Claire looked down at her hands. "That's rare." "Yeah," Jake said softly. "But maybe it doesn't have to be." He gave her a small nod and walked toward the door. "I'll be back," he said over his shoulder. "I'm starting to believe you," she replied, and maybe, just maybe, she meant it. The apartment started to smell like lemons. Not because Claire was some kind of homemaking wizard. God knew she barely had the energy. But because Jake had shown up 3 days in a row each time with something useful, a fan, a tub of cleaning supplies, even a replacement smoke detector, just in case. The last time he'd handed her a bag of lemon wipes with a shrug and a lopsided smile. "Trust me," he said, "cleans up soot but makes it smell like you baked something." "You're dangerously close to being my favorite human," she'd replied before she could stop herself. He'd laughed, then looked at her like he wasn't sure if she was joking. The thing was, neither was she. She wasn't used to this, used to people helping, just to help, used to someone showing up without needing something in return. Her ex had been the opposite, charming when he wanted to be, distant when things got hard, and then gone the moment she told him she was pregnant. Jake didn't flinch when things were messy. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer, didn't act like she owed him for showing up. He just came by, checked a pipe cleaned, a vent sat on the floor while Eli showed him every last toy truck he owned. And Claire found herself waiting for the next knock at the door more than she liked to admit. That Saturday, Jake came by late in the afternoon with a small toolbox and an energy drink in one hand. "Sink's dripping now," he said after she let him in. She blinked. "How did you—" "Your upstairs neighbor told me," he said, kneeling down under the kitchen sink. "Said she heard water. I figured I'd check." Claire folded her arms. "You ever think maybe you're doing too much?" "Yep," he said easily, half his body and already under the sink. "Think it all the time." She laughed soft in surprise. "So why do it anyway?" He looked up at her, one hand bracing the underside of the sink. "Because sometimes the hardest part of healing is believing you deserve help." Claire's breath caught, and for a moment she forgot how to build the wall back up again. Later, they sat on the back steps outside her apartment while Eli napped inside. The sun was low, casting that golden light that made everything look like it belonged in a dream. Jake sipped his drink. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, though it wasn't cold. "Want to know something ridiculous?" she asked suddenly. Jake raised an eyebrow. "I still keep the baby monitor on, even though Eli's 4, she said. "Part of me is scared I'll miss something like the fire. Or worse." "That's not ridiculous," Jake said softly. She looked down. "I feel like I'm always waiting for the next bad thing to happen." "I know the feeling," he said. "Used to sleep with my shoes on, just in case I had to run." Claire turned her head slowly. "Why?" He shrugged. "Long story, not one I tell easily." She didn't press, but she wanted to, not out of nosiness, but because it felt like he was slowly unlocking parts of her, and she wanted to do the same. Instead, she asked, "Why us?" Jake blinked. "What do you mean? Why keep checking in? I'm sure you see a lot of people in bad situations. You don't go back to all of them." "No," he said, "I don't." Silence stretched between them. Then he said quietly, "But some people don't leave your mind. You and Eli, you're one of those people." Claire's chest ached in a way she hadn't felt in years. Not panic, not grief, not even hope, but something quieter, like possibility. Eli woke up cranky and clingy and climbed straight into Jake's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Sorry," Claire muttered, going to pull him back, but Jake shook his head. "It's fine," he said. "I've held worse. Once carried a cat down a tree while it peed on me the whole way." Eli giggled, nestling closer. Claire stared at them, this firefighter, with soot still under his nails, and her son resting against his chest, and her walls cracked a little more. Jake wasn't asking for anything, and that somehow made her want to give him something real. That night, after Jake left and Eli was finally asleep, Claire stood in the kitchen, running her hand over the scrubbed countertop. She glanced toward the baby monitor, then out the window where Jake had stood. The kitchen had burned, but the house still stood, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one still trying to rebuild from the inside out. Claire started pulling away before she even realized she was doing it. The call she used to return within minutes now went unanswered for hours. The door she used to unlock the moment she heard his knock, now she waited just a little too long before opening. And when Jake did come in, she always seemed to have something on the stove or a pile of laundry to fold or a reason not to sit and talk. Jake noticed, of course he did, but he didn't say anything, just nodded, helped with whatever needed doing, and left a little quicker each time. And that, more than anything, made her heart ache. It had been 2 weeks since the fire. The kitchen had been scrubbed to a dull shine. The walls still carried faint shadows of smoke, but things looked normal again. Too normal. Claire found herself watching the door some nights, heart tight in her chest, willing a knock that never came because she'd made it clear, maybe not with words, but with her distance, that she didn't want him to keep showing up, even if that wasn't true. "You miss him," Eli said one morning, dragging his spoon through cereal. Claire blinked. "Who the fire guy?" he said matter-of-factly. "Jake." She smiled tightly. "You miss him, you mean?" He shook his head. "No, you do. You smile when he's here." Claire's throat tightened. "Do I?" Eli nodded unfazed. "But you don't let him stay anymore." She couldn't explain it to her 4-year-old, couldn't say how terrified she was of getting used to someone, of needing someone again, of believing this time would be different because the last time she'd let someone stay, they left anyway. Jake didn't come by all week, and then the storm hit. The sky turned charcoal by mid-afternoon, and the wind screamed through the trees like something alive. Rain battered the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Eli was curled under a blanket with wide eyes clutching a flashlight, even though the power hadn't gone out yet. Claire was pacing the kitchen when she heard a loud crash from the back hallway. A burst pipe, she realized with a jolt. The ceiling had cracked, and water was now streaming down the wall like a faucet turned on high. "Seriously," she muttered, grabbing towels and buckets. "Of course." She stared at the water already soaking through the floorboards and felt herself spiraling. Her hands shook, her breath grew shallow. It was too much again. Something always broke, something always collapsed, and she was always the only one there to fix it, except her fingers hovered over her phone. She hesitated for a long time, and then, almost like her body acted before her mind caught up, she hit the contact that had stayed pinned to the top of her list for days. Jake. He arrived 20 minutes later, soaked through and out of breath. "Pipe burst?" he asked, already scanning the hallway. She nodded, unable to speak. "Where's Eli?" he asked. "Sleeping somehow." Jake gave a quick nod. "Okay, let me see what I can do." And just like that, he was back, his shirt sticking to his back tool bag, in one hand, flashlight clenched between his teeth as he crouched under the sink. He worked with quiet intensity, muttering to himself, adjusting valves, stuffing rags into place. Claire stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. Jake looked up. "For what?" "For pushing you away." He didn't answer right away, just kept working, sealing off the leak before sitting back on his heels. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You never did." "I know," she said. "That's part of why it scared me." He looked at her, then really looked at her. His eyes were tired but kind patient. "I didn't mean to make things harder," he said. "I just wanted you to know you weren't alone." She stepped into the room slowly. "I've spent so long keeping people out because needing someone has never ended well for me." "I get that," Jake said softly. "Trust me." They stood in silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the steady dripping from the hallway. Then Jake added, "But not everyone leaves." Claire's voice cracked. "And how do you know which ones won't?" He didn't smile, didn't offer any poetic answer. He just said, "You don't, but sometimes they keep showing up until you start to believe they will." Eli patted out a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes. Jake crouched down. "Hey, little man, you okay?" Eli yawned. "You came back." Jake tousled his hair. "Always." Claire watched them, watched her son lean into Jake's shoulder without hesitation, watched Jake pick him up without thinking, and something inside her shifted. The storm outside hadn't let up, but the one inside her, maybe just maybe, was starting to clear. The pipe was fixed, the towels were drying, and Jake was still there. Claire stood in the middle of the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. Jake leaned against the counter, arms smeared with grease and water stains, his hair still damp from the storm. Neither of them spoke until finally, quietly, Claire said, "You could have just not come." Jake's voice was steady. "Yeah, I know." She looked up, her eyes glassy. "Why did you—" He exhaled through his nose like he'd been holding it in for hours. "Because I don't like leaving things broken." Claire flinched because that hit too close, too deep. Jake stepped forward just one step. "I'm not trying to fix you, Claire, or Eli. I know I can't." Her voice cracked. "But you keep showing up like you can." "I show up because I care." he said gently. That's it. That's the whole reason. Claire sat down hard at the table, shoulders slumped. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Let someone care, she whispered. Let someone stay. Jake didn't move her but the house for a moment, then he crossed the room and sat across from her, close enough to touch, if either of them dared. I didn't know how either, he said. Not at first. She blinked at him, surprised. Jake looked at his hands. After my dad died, I shut down for years, pushed everyone away. It felt safer to do things alone than risk needing someone who might leave. Claire's heart pulled. You never talk about him. I don't talk about a lot of things, he smiled sadly, but maybe I should. They talked, really talked, for the first time since the fire. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was warm, shared. Trust began to stretch between them like a fragile thread, something stitched together slowly by presence, not pressure. Jake told her about being the youngest on the crew, always trying to prove himself about the first house fire he ever walked into, and how the smell of burning drywall stayed on his clothes for days, about how sometimes the worst damage was the kind no hose could reach. Claire told him how lonely pregnancy was when the father disappeared, how Eli was the only good thing that came from a stretch of her life filled with shame and fear, how she still checked every outlet in the kitchen twice before bed, now just in case. Jake listened like he was absorbing every word, no judgment, just space. Eli woke up from his nap again and wandered in, blinking. Jake scooped him up without being asked, settled him in his lap like they'd done this 100 times before. Claire leaned in the doorway watching them, and something in her broke open, not in a painful way, in a necessary one. After dinner, pasta thrown together hastily but devoured like it was gourmet. Claire walked Jake to the door. He hesitated, hand on the knob. I should let you get some rest. She nodded but didn't move. Jake looked at her. You okay? Claire hesitated, then said softly, You said you don't like leaving things broken. He nodded slowly. Well, she continued, voice shaking just slightly. I think I've been broken for a long time. I don't need you to fix me, Jake, but I don't want to keep pretending I don't want you here either. His eyes met hers, quiet and wide. Claire added, I'm scared every day, but when you're here, it's not as loud. Jake reached out and gently touched her hand. I'm scared too, he said. That surprised her, he added, but I'm not going anywhere, not unless you ask me to. She stared at his hand wrapped gently around hers, and finally, she didn't pull away. That night, the apartment felt different, not quieter, but fuller, like maybe the fire hadn't taken something from them after all. Maybe it had opened the door for something new, something warm, something steady, something that wasn't going anywhere. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and toasted bread. Sunlight spilled through the windows, casting soft shadows across the room. Eli was sitting at the small table, carefully coloring in a picture of a firefighter, his hero, while Claire stood by the counter stirring eggs in a pan. Jake was perched on the edge of the couch, watching the morning ritual with an easy smile that made Claire's chest tighten in the best way. It had been weeks since the fire, and even longer since Jake had first started showing up without hesitation. They had settled into a new rhythm, messy, real, and unexpectedly warm. Mom, Eli said suddenly, holding up his picture. Look, this is you, and that's Jake saving us. Claire chuckled softly. I see it. Jake leaned forward. Looks like I'm the hero now, Eli grinned. You are. Jake reached out, ruffling Eli's hair. I'm just glad I could help. Claire caught Jake's eyes across the room, feeling a flutter of something fragile and hopeful. They had both been through fire, literal and figurative, and somehow they were still standing together. Later that afternoon, Jake was fixing a cabinet door that had hung crooked ever since the fire. Claire sat nearby folding laundry, her gaze drifting to him every so often, the way his hands moved confidently, the soft crease in his brow when he concentrated. She realized how much comfort he brought her without saying a word. When he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, Eli called out, Jake, come play with me. Without hesitation, Jake dropped the rag and crawled onto the floor, making silly faces that had Eli giggling uncontrollably. Claire smiled, warmth filling her heart. This was more than she had dared hope for. As the evening settled, Claire found herself sitting close to Jake on the couch. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but filled with quiet understanding. Her fingers found his, and he didn't pull away. Do you want to stay? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's eyes met hers steady and sure. I want to be here with you both. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. The walls she had built so carefully were crumbling, and behind them a life waiting to be built. That night after Eli was tucked into bed, Claire and Jake stood by the window looking out at the city lights flickering like stars. Jake brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. You saved me too. She smiled, leaning into him. We saved each other. And in that moment, the flames of the past felt like distant memories, because here, right now, they were safe. They were home. Life often throws us into fires, some literal, like the one that upended Claire's world, and others emotional, burning through the walls we build to protect ourselves. The story of Claire, Eli, and Jake teaches us a profound lesson. Healing begins when we dare to let someone in, even when fear screams to keep them out. Claire, a single mom haunted by past betrayals, was terrified to trust again. Yet Jake, a quiet firefighter, showed up, not just to douse the flames in her kitchen, but to offer a steady presence that warmed her guarded heart. His persistence, his kindness without expectation showed that trust isn't about guarantees. It's about choosing to believe in someone's presence day after day. This story reminds us that we don't heal alone. It's in the small acts, Jake's lemon wipes his time with Eli, his refusal to walk away, that we find the courage to rebuild. We learn that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the doorway to connection, to a family forged not by blood, but by care. Let this be a call to open your heart, even when it's scary, because the people who keep showing up can change everything. What's a moment when someone's kindness helped you trust again? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love or support transformed your life. If this story touched you, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more heartfelt journeys. Let's keep inspiring each other.